What's up, friends? Here's a little bit about how Mark Wahlberg became Marky Mark. And this is how we used to make the party start. This is a little bit about how I became Father Mark Mary. Hey, I'm Father Mark Mary with the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and this is Ascension Presents True Story. I'm baptized Mark, and Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch was something they called me and my friends, which was kind of funny when I met Mark Wahlberg and gave him ashes. But I've been doing this here on Ascension Presents every week for about 8 years, which is a good amount of time. Why not just share a little bit about how I got here and what God did in my life? Grew up Catholic, really good home, and just a really strong foundation. But when I went to college for the first time, I went to a Catholic school, and like the chapel was literally right out my window. I could definitely throw like a football, definitely a baseball, probably a football, and hit it. But for whatever reason, like for the first time in my life, I stopped going to Mass on Sunday. It was about 2 months in, so I'm in college, kind of doing this first time not going to Mass. I'm in this dorm party drinking boxed wine out of a used Diet Pepsi bottle. I like to say because I was always a Franciscan, even then. And I got into this conversation with this girl who said she was an atheist. I started like to defend the faith and how can you not believe? And it's the word of God. And I just got like rocked by this grace, this lightning bolt of grace. Because one of the things that was hanging me up is I had this idea of like, I wanted to be dynamic and well-rounded, which meant like, yeah, God would be part of my life. I could go to Mass, do a service trip, like don't get crazy, you know? Kind of you still like socialize like everybody else. And this grace just came in and just hit me. And it was like, I believe and it needs to affect my whole life. And I left the party, like cried and called this lady from the church and went to the church that was right next door for like the first time since I've been there and took all the pamphlets from the back. Like it was in like the middle of the night. It was like 2 or 3 a.m. Even though I was like this young 18-year-old kid, slightly intoxicated, my entire life changed. 2 months later, I'm helping out with this confirmation retreat. And there's the speaker who like it had nothing to do with really the topic, but he mentions this thing about Mother Teresa and how she helps with the poor. Lightning bolt right to my heart. The deepest and profoundest conviction that I was made to give my life to the poorest of the poor and nothing else would satisfy. And I was kind of like a spoiled rich kid. And all of a sudden this happened. And now like the number one thing I want to do is to give my life to the poor. It's like, this is what I know I'm made for. And slowly I started to learn more about the sacraments, particularly the sacrament of confession and of the Most Holy Eucharist, and the role the priest has in like ministering these sacraments and bringing Jesus wherever he goes. And the desire to be a priest started to well up. True story. I was at In-N-Out Burger one night, and we went there after like some young adult meeting, and there was a kid there, this guy, I only met this one time. And I kind of mentioned, I'm thinking about being a priest and thinking about working with the poor. And he says, there's this group of Franciscans out in New York who are hardcore and sleep on the ground. And that's all he knew. And I was like 18, 19 at the time. And it was like the most hardcore way to follow Jesus I'd heard about. So I went home that night, Google searched like Franciscan, gray, beard, reform, New York. And I found the CFRs. I found their website. And I found our constitutions, which is where we say like what we're all about. And I read the constitutions. And it was like my heart, like the deepest desires of my heart, all in this piece of paper about the poor and about the Eucharist and about prayer and adoration and the Mass and pro-life and the austerity and like getting after it and penance and doing it as communion, like a community. And it was just like, I call it, it was like love at first bite. I'm like, if this is real, this is everything I'm looking for. And what I find out is like God, and it's true, like I changed my life. I changed my major to like philosophy. I started on this pursuit to become a CFR, even though I'd never talked to a CFR. I think part of the grace though was like God made my vocation clear because the perseverance would be hard. Because there was this pretty little blonde girl that came into my life that complicated things. I'd end up falling in love with. But I remember going on a date and it was awesome. It was great. And then going home and watching a John Paul II documentary and seeing him. And I remember again, just like all by myself, breaking down in tears, like with desire. I'm so attracted to marriage and being like a father in that way. But the deepest desire of my heart, like it's mysterious, I can't totally explain it, but the deepest desire of my heart is to serve Almighty God in this church as a priest. And this like experience of the desire was the thing that really gave me like confidence and clarity to make a number of like really hard choices that would lead me ultimately to joining the CFRs, joining the Friars of the Renewal and becoming a priest. So I'm just going to kind of like reflect on that with maybe some insight that I've taken that's maybe more than just for me, but for other people as well. I do like notice that I was the recipient of a number of what we could call like extraordinary graces. They didn't quite make sense and they weren't offered to everybody. And it kind of gives me some understanding of how like, God of everybody, he called David, who's out in the field. He called me when I was, at the dorm party. He gave Saul this great moment of clarity and conversion. How Levi, when Jesus says, "Come follow me," he leaves everything and follows me. That actually really deeply resonates. I get how that happens. And my understanding of what to do with it is to be moved with the most profound gratitude. And I get some other people will be like, "Well, I didn't receive those grades," that kind of stuff. And it's true. It's just true. For whatever reason, God chose me. And I think he had a particular desire to bring me to this community in this way, for me, but also for the church. And that I've received this grace and hopefully responded to it in the way that I have, so that it has been a source of grace for other people. And I think this is a little bit of how God has acted in my life, and maybe a little bit in some of these guys that we see in David or Saul or Matthew, Levi, who became Matthew. It's a grace given to one, but for the many. I'm deeply grateful for God's mercy in my life. The second thing is God clearly had a plan. I've talked about this for the Rosary in the Year stuff. That conversion I had was at the very end of the year of the Most Holy Rosary. And I had this conversion, this moment that everything changed. Hearing this random passing thing about Mother Teresa, meeting this one kid at this one young adult thing, who I never met again, I don't know his name. Watching this documentary, John Paul II, there was these instruments, these people who God used to change my life. Most of them who I never met, and one of them who I met once. And isn't that just mysterious and interesting? And I think a second thing that I see about it is just God clearly had a plan. As I look back even on my own life, I notice it is mysterious. I don't understand it all, but what is clear is it's not arbitrary. And God's will and God's work in our life and God's providence in our lives and those we love, it is mysterious, but it's not arbitrary. There's reason and rationale, and there is a plan that God has. I've talked about this before. I had my conversion at the very end of the year of the Most Holy Rosary. I don't know. I think it's interesting that then I did God called me, invited me into this whole Rosary in a Year podcast thing. I had this experience in and out where I meet and learn about the CFRs, and I changed the whole trajectory of my life to become a CFR, even though I've never met one. Well, at one point I took a year off and I did some missionary work in South Africa. And while I was there, all of my young adults, all of my best friends got connected with this missionary trip down in Honduras that served right next to the CFRs. And they all met that summer, that year, a bunch of CFRs, and became best friends with them before I even met them. And all of a sudden, these friars who I feel called to are part of all of my friends' life. And it's oh, that's kind of seems like God's doing something here, My full religious name is Mark Mary Maximilian of Anaheim Hills. I had no background in media, no interest in media, no draw to media, no thought I'd be doing anything media. But St. Maximilian Kolbe is the patron saint of the media evangelization. And I picked him for all these different reasons that had nothing to do with that. But I can't help but think, interesting. Here I am, sort of accidentally falling into this media apostolate of evangelization, and one of my patrons is St. Maximilian Kolbe. It seems like maybe God had a plan, so he gave me, a patron saint to help intercede for me as his plan unfolded. And the last thing is this: there's this common kind of funny thread of I have my conversion at the end of the year of the Most Holy Rosary, so I really attribute that grace to these people who were praying for me, who I never met. And then there's this guy who I barely know, who mentions Mother Teresa, who I've never met. My whole life changes. I meet a kid at In-N-Out Burger, meet him that one time, don't know his name, no idea what's going on with him. He's the one who introduces me to my first love, my ultimate love, that other than God, the Friars of the Renewal. I watched a John Paul II documentary, never met him, never saw that guy. This deep grace happens. And it's just interesting that God used all of these people who really who I never really met or didn't have a relationship with, and who have no idea the effect they had on my life. And I think that's a good reminder of just how God's grace works. And we just got to be faithful. We're just faithful, and we trust that the Lord is using us, and that he's using us in ways that we may never know. These men and women who are praying the rosary, I really believe that changed my life. Particularly Mother Teresa, John Paul II, who are just holy and just saints. They gave me such a gift, and they changed my life. And I think it's just a reminder of just being faithful, and that we can never underestimate the power of holiness. And so let us just be grateful for the graces that God has given us. Let us trust that his plan, while it is mysterious, it's not arbitrary. Let's trust that also that just God is using us, that God is using us and using other people, and that his plan is continuing to unfold. And all we have to do is just kind of keep making the next best step. And if we're faithful to that, God's going to take care of the details. So anyway, friends, thanks for praying for me. Thanks for journeying along with me for so long. Poco a poco. Poco a poco. Somos peregrinos. We are pilgrims on this earth. No. Somos peregrinos. We are pilgrims. Poco a poco, little by little. Vamos a seguir. We're gonna make it. Bye.